we will begin. Most of us don't really think about how money works. We go to work, we know that we need to earn money, and we have opinions about how we're spending money and how other people spend money in governments and states and all this kind of thing, but we don't really think about how money works. That is a mistake. Money affects everything that we do in our society. Actually, money is sort of the base layer on which our entire civilization is built on top of. Everything that we do revolves around money. And because of that, how money works affects everything that happens in our society, even those things that are not strictly financial. Money affects it all. In that way, you can kind of say that money is the base layer for what a society or a civilization is built on top of. And therefore, everything has to do with the money. So what is money and why do we have it, right? Well, we need to be able to transfer value using a common measurement. So that's sort of why we have money. But what is it? If you ask someone what is money, they'll probably default to the idea that it's something that you use to spend, to buy things or to go into stores or buy things. And that's true, but it misses a lot of what the purpose of money is. I like the definition that money is what we use to measure and store value and transfer it through both space and time. So transferring value through space is kind of what it sounds like there. You earn money in one place, you earn value in one place, and then you go somewhere else to spend that money. You go buy things in the stores, you buy things online. You're transferring value through space in order to acquire goods. Transferring value through time is something that we don't necessarily think about as much, though. That's the store of value function of money. When you transfer value through time, you need to be able to save value into the future. So that's what we do when we save some money in our paychecks, right? We earn our paychecks, we spend some of it on food, on goods, and other kind of things, and then we save that into the future so we can buy more food, vacations, other kind of things in the future. We're storing value through time. And what that means is that we need our money to be able to hold its value somewhat into the future so we can spend it there. And we're going to be talking a lot about storing value through time because it's easier said than done. On the bottom of the slide here are sort of the three fundamental functions of money. And I'm not going to talk about these too much because I prefer the framework of money is to transfer value through space and time. Now, that is my preferred framework for thinking about what is money. But these three fundamental functions of money are what you'll see if you Google what is money or look in any sort of book about it or anything like that. A unit of account is sort of how you price goods. So you go into a store, you see that a price tag is priced in dollars, and that's your unit of account. You're pricing things in a certain currency. A medium of exchange is the actual tool that you're using to transfer that value. So for a lot of us, we think that that's the same thing. Isn't unit of account and medium of exchange the same thing? We see that the price tag is in dollars, and then we actually pay for things in dollars. But it doesn't really have to be that way, right? Say that my friend comes on over and he buys us pizza and he covers the pizza. He brings us pizza. He spends about $20 on pizza. Fine. Next time we go out, we go to the bar, I buy him a couple beers. I cover him for the beers because he covered me for the pizza. We're both thinking in terms of dollars there. He paid me about $20 for pizza. I'm paying about $20 for beer. Our unit of account is dollars in that way, but the medium of exchange that we're using to actually transfer the value in that case is pizza and beer. We're transferring value using that unit of account in a different medium of exchange. One other way to think of that would be maybe you're buying an NFT on something like OpenSea. You see that the price of the NFT is in Ethereum, but you're really thinking in terms of dollars. Wow, that NFT is $3,000. But when you're buying that NFT, you're using Ethereum, and Ethereum is functioning as the medium of exchange, even though your mental unit of account is in dollars. Now, store of value is kind of the big function of money that we're going to talk about a lot here, because for a lot of people around the world, their local currency cannot function well as a unit, as a store of value. We're lucky in that regard, people in the US, Europe, Britain, Japan, those kind of things, where we can kind of rely on our currency to a degree to store value into the future. A lot of countries can't say the same. In that way, other goods can kind of function well as stores of value, like fine art, jewelry, precious metals, and real estate, things like that. They can function well as stores of value. We're going to be covering this a lot because to me, storing value is the most important function of money. And it's where a lot of us get confused because we default to this idea that money is something that you use to buy goods in stores. But technically, technologically, a lot of things can function well to be used as a unit of account and medium of exchange. A lot of things are portable and easily transportable, identifiable, and that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff could work fine as a unit of account, but not many things work well as a store of value. It's very hard to be able to store value over time. So, so that's something that we're going to be covering a lot here. And as we move forward, we're going to be wanting to know what kind of forms of money were used throughout history. Why did money develop the way that it did? Because it's not just enough to say, here's the evolution of money. We need to understand why money evolved the way that it did. And then what lessons can we take from that as we sort of keep moving into how money works today. So here we're going into the history of money. You can see that I, now shifted my presentation. I had combined slides here for this. So when did money start? And how did it start? It's interesting because the first forms of money really started to emerge around 9000 BC. And what makes that interesting is that humans have been around in our modern form for something like 200,000 years. So for only about 5% of our history as a species have we had money. Now, what happened around that time, around 9000 BC, that kind of caused money to start to develop? It was the dawn of agriculture and farming techniques. As humans started to develop more advanced farming techniques, we started to settle down in the same kind of places. We no longer needed to hunt and gather. We would settle in one place and start to farm. And as that happened, society started to grow in size. We were having more food and we started to grow in size. And as society settled, as the size of communities kind of started to grow, so too did the need for trade. And along with trade comes the need for money. We've all heard about barter before, and a lot of people like to focus on why barter doesn't work. And it doesn't work, for some of the reasons I listed here on a bullet point. If you're not familiar, barter is when you're exchanging one good directly for another. So if I'm a blacksmith and Andy is selling medicinal herbs, we would trade my tools for his herbs directly. But that doesn't work for a lot of reasons. And those reasons are because, it's too many prices to keep track of. Sometimes you don't want the other person's thing that they're selling. So what do? And a number of other reasons. But what's really interesting about barter is why barter always turns to money. So if you're in a small group or a society, you're going to need to exchange things with one another. And as you're doing that, there are always going to be certain kind of goods that everybody in the group wants, right? You're always going to have certain things that are more highly desired than others. So again, if I'm a blacksmith, but not everybody needs my tools, then maybe my tools are not going to be so valuable. But if everybody in the group is using sugar, for example, sugar is something that is highly demanded by everybody. So what starts to happen if you have a barter society is that people will recognize that there are goods that are always going to be demanded by everyone, that everybody needs some kinds of goods. And what they do is people will start to seek out the goods that are highly demanded by everybody, specifically for the purpose of trading them away again in the future. So if I'm a blacksmith, nobody wants my tools. I see that all 50 people in the group are consuming sugar on a daily basis. I'm going to go out of my way to start to acquire sugar specifically for the purpose of trading it away again in the future when I need to get certain things. Those kind of goods, in essence, are the first forms of money, the goods that everybody in a group kind of seeks out and needs, and then people try to acquire in order specifically to trade away again in the future. And this kind of advantage of a barter system is why barter never lasts. Money will always naturally develop because there are always going to be goods that everybody in a group needs. And that's how our first forms of money kind of came to be. And that's why there will never be a society without money. Money will always develop no matter what, because there's always going to be goods that everybody needs, and people are going to try and seek them out to then trade away again in the future. No matter what, even if it starts as barter, even if it just starts as friendly trade, money will always develop. And when a good kind of becomes money, when it takes on this extra role as money, if sugar is becoming money in my example here, then it becomes even more valuable, right? Because I'm starting to acquire sugar, not just because I need the sugar, but because I'm going to try and trade it away again in the future. So the demand for sugar across the society is going higher and higher as more people are trying to acquire it. That is kind of what we call a monetary premium, where now sugar is being valued even more highly than its kind of natural use case because it's taken on this extra role as money and it becomes harder to acquire as a result. Sugar in this example has taken on a monetary premium. And we see that today with things like gold, where gold is valued at $1,800 an ounce or whatever, but its use in industry warrants much less of a valuation. Gold is valued as highly as it is today because it has taken on this extra role as money and it has accrued this monetary premium as a result. So this is sort of how the first forms of money came. We started settling down, trade developed, and naturally money started to arise. Now, these first forms of money were, as I sort of said, anything that kind of comes up in a situation. So it could be livestock shells, beads, jewelry, other kind of animal, natural, plant products started to work as the first forms of money. Whatever a society had in relative abundance that everybody needed would kind of work to being its first forms of money. But these things don't really work that well as money, just because they're the most primitive forms of money. Uh, they're not that great. You can't control the supply easily. A lot of these forms of money are not that divisible. If it's a plant product, maybe it goes bad or something like that. And so they worked as money. They were primitive forms of money, but they didn't really work that well. And that's why we kind of come to this importance of relative scarcity in money and why having some level of scarcity is so important in a form of money. If you own one shell out of a supply of 100 shells, then you have 1% of the supply. But if shells are easily found in abundance and now there's 1,000 shells a week later, your portion of the pie is a lot smaller. And that's sort of an example of why these early forms of money didn't allow things to function. And if you have a form of money that's more scarce, where the supply does not increase rapidly, you have your kind of same portion of the pie as time goes by, and you can kind of hold your wealth better. Now, to illustrate this a little bit further, if you go to work on a Monday and you get paid for 8 hours of work, and you know that your form of money is going to lose its value entirely in a week, you are going to take what you earned for that 8 hours of work and go and spend it immediately, right? Because you know that 1 week from now, your value is going to be gone. You have to earn your money today and then spend it today. And what that means is that you're not able to kind of plan for the future. You have to consume immediately. You have to go out and buy things. And you're not sort of able to build up any sort of savings. Now, if you have a form of money that is able to store its value over time, this kind of changes the game a lot. So now imagine that you go to work, you work an 8 hour day, but in order to buy food for your family, pay your rent, or whatever, you only need to spend half of your paycheck. So you went to work for 8 hours a day, and then you only consumed 4 hours of work by spending that money. You spent half your paycheck, you spent half of the time that you spent working. Now, though, you're saving half of your paycheck for the future. In essence, what you're doing is you're saving 4 hours of work that you spent but did not consume into the future. You're saving time that you spent working and you're storing that time in the form of money for the future. And that kind of lets you plan for the future. It lets you build up this reserve for where if you're sick, if something happens and you lose your job, you have banked this time that you have already spent working but did not consume so that you kind of can have this safety net. And that's sort of how money can really kind of function as storage of time itself. And if you think about that in terms of our retirement, when we're saving for retirement today, we're putting a little bit away of our paycheck every day, every couple of weeks. And what we're trying to do is build up this savings. And what that really means is that when we save our money, we're saving this time that we already spent working. And so when we retire at the age of 65 or 70, and we're not working anymore, and we're drawing down on our savings for retirement, we're really drawing on the fact that we spent 50 years working, but we didn't consume all of that work right away. We saved that work into the future. So now we can spend 30 years not working because we have this reserves of time in the form of money being saved. for the future. But, as we'll talk about later, you can't really just save your money in the bank if you want to retire, right? So scarcity is a necessary feature of money, and it's an important one as we see money start to develop. And so these natural kind of goods like herbs, whatever, animals, they don't really function that well as money. And we started to see metal kind of emerge as money. And metal obviously is more durable. It can kind of be standardized, more portable, and it can hold value better than natural products because it is more scarce. And so, different types of metal were used in early forms of money. You saw bronze used a lot. Copper could be used too, but well, those forms of money work. But what we sort of started to settle on was silver, and silver is a more scarce form of metal than both bronze and silver. And what we got here with Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome are three really big advancements in kind of the history of money's progression. So we had these natural goods. We started seeing a little bit of a shift towards metals, and I think it's China that actually started using bronze metal spades as the first metal form of money. But what we see here with Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome are three civilizations and societies that we all know. And we have tremendous respect for, that we study in our history classes, right? And we look at these civilizations and we praise the advancements in science and technology and the arts and architecture and all this stuff. But we don't ever talk about the fact that all three of these civilizations had highly advanced forms of money for their time, that they were at the cutting edge of monetary technology. And so let's talk about that a little bit. In Mesopotamia, we started to see money become metal a little bit, and it was really the shekel, which was a weight of silver that was used for their money after a failed experiment with things like clay tokens. When you had the Mesopotamian shekel, you had a little bit of silver, but it didn't have to be shaped in any way or any form or anything like that. It was just a weight of silver represented the money in ancient Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia was huge. It stretched all across the Middle East. It's one of our earliest, greatest ancient civilizations. In Greece, you started to see coins really develop. And silver coins, the drachma, were really another kind of advancement in monetary technology, because when you have coins, not only are you using a relatively scarce metal, but you're standardizing it. You're making it so that each coin looks alike. It's harder to counterfeit because you have that kind of standard shape, and everyone can kind of easily recognize money and transport money in the same way. So you went from money being metal, you had the silver shekel, to the advancement of coins. And then with Rome, you had this entire empire built upon the silver denarius, after actually it had a failed experiment with bronze money right before the year zero in a war that had the currency collapse. Then they moved to silver, and an entire empire was built upon the Roman denarius. And so, again, the more you're able to store value into the future, the more you're able to focus on things outside of what's just happening today. You don't have to work today to consume today. You can start saving into the future and focusing on other things. So at the same time, when farming is continuously becoming more advanced and there's enough food for everybody to eat and things like that, what you start to see in these civilizations is that as they're using forms of money that allow them to store their value into the future, people are able to focus their time on things outside of just subsistence. So you don't just have to farm so you can eat anymore. You can focus on things like the arts, on theater, whatever, because you're able to save your money, and you're kind of building up this continual reserves as technology is improving into the future. So we've got this kind of big moment here where we've moved from natural things to metals, and from metals to coins. And what's kind of interesting here is that silver is the metal that people are using, right? And why is that? We all think about gold as the dominant metal, but for a lot of monetary history, silver was the dominant metal that was used. And that's important, because I was just talking a lot about scarcity, but a really important fact about money is that the scarce money has to be divisible as well, right? And gold, for example, was too rare to function well as money. It was too rare, it was too valuable. You couldn't divide it into small enough pieces. And because of that, silver functioned better for sort of day-to-day monetary trade. gold was too rare to function. And that's a point worth emphasizing, because there are people out there that will say, scarcity in the absolute is the most important function of money, or is the most important trait of good money, but that scarce money has to be sufficiently divisible to function. And that's where silver really functioned as a one size fits all approach to money, where it was relatively scarce, but also abundant enough that it could be transported, that it could be divided into small enough amounts and function for low cost payments. So after the Roman Empire fell around the year 500, and there's a big role of money in that as well, you have the Dark Ages, and we're not going to talk about the Dark Ages, but you started to see the emergence of things like the British pound. And I'm not going to talk about the British pound as much as what the British pound represents, because we're kind of moving away from pure silver functioning as the dominant metal to a bimetallism system emerging. So what you started to see over the couple hundred years past the collapse of the Roman Empire was that gold coins were being introduced to complement silver currency, where instead of just using silver for everything, you had silver functioning for small everyday payments, and then gold was being conducted for large trade and maybe for savings. So now it's another step forward towards moving towards forms of money that are more scarce, right? And there is this clear trend through monetary history where humans have naturally gravitated towards the forms of money that best store value over time. And those forms of money are the ones that are the most scarce, as long as they're sufficiently divisible. But that's a clear trend. And so when you introduce gold into the monetary system here, you get an improvement over silver, because now you have a money, silver, that you can still use for your day-to-day payments. But now you have the additional scarce properties of gold for larger payments, or importantly, for savings. And so you kind of, people in this time adopted kind of a naturally, a multi-currency mindset. And that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit more later too, where, you don't have to have one money that does it all. You can have different money for different purposes. You might have one money like silver for spending, and then another money like gold for saving, for different purposes, different functions of money. So bimetallism went on for a while, and it's another step up from just using silver, because now you have this additional wealth storing property in gold, and you saw bimetallism start to emerge across the world. And obviously, in a pre-internet age, it takes a while for things to start to get across the world, and then people to adopt these currencies. But that's the next step. We went from just silver to bimetallism, and that continued for let's just call it 600 years, right? Maybe it started to be around 1000 that bimetallism started to show. And then around 1600, by the Bank of England, we started to see the emergence of paper money. And I do note here that the earliest forms of paper monies appeared in China in the earliest 7th century, but they didn't actually work. And a couple hundred years later, China went back to metals because their paper money experiment failed. And that's an interesting little note. We didn't just come up with paper money here in the last couple hundred years. China was on this about 1,000 years before us, and it failed and it didn't work. But in its current stage, paper money became more common around the 1600s. And I believe that it was because we had this system of bimetallism, and the Bank of England needed to start collecting tax payments from people that were located very far away. And gold is not that easily transportable. It's obviously heavy. And so they started introducing paper notes backed by gold as a mechanism for payments, and accepting tax payments and things like that. And so what's interesting about this, again, is that the reason that silver achieved dominance for a while over gold is that it was able to be used for small payments, that you could use small value payments in the form of silver, but you couldn't with gold. But with the introduction of paper money backed by gold, now you're actually able to transfer $1 worth of gold in the form of a paper note. So now with the introduction of paper, as long as it's sufficiently backed by gold, yada yada, gold is now more divisible than it ever was before. And this is sort of where you started to see money go. You had gold becoming the form of money that was used worldwide, because by using gold, you get the best value storing properties that humanity has seen up until this point. You're storing your value in the hardest currency out there. But now, through the emergence of paper notes as a technology, you're able to make gold as divisible as you need it, which is something that never kind of happened before. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is the demonetization um, of the last 500 years, actually, is sort of the demonetization of silver, where as gold has become more dominant and we've started denominating completely in gold and global currencies became gold with paper used for divisibility, silver's role in the monetary scheme of things has gotten less and less. And now, if you talk about silver today, people always talk about the people that like silver, the silver bugs, will talk about its use in industry, but that's actually a negative thing because where a metal gets most of its monetary value is from this monetary premium, and silver has been losing its monetary premium for 500 years or so. So up until this point, right, we're now actually at where money is today, almost. Paper money has evolved here through about 1900, where gold is the metal of money for almost the entire world, and paper notes are the mechanism for allowing gold to be transported more easily and infinitely divisible. And that's where sort of the entire world has settled. And I really want to emphasize this because if you pause monetary history at the year 1900, you have this clear 12,000 year arc of humans naturally gravitating towards the forms of money that are the most scarce as long as they are sufficiently divisible. There is this clear arc over more than 10,000 years where this is what it looks like. This is us progressing towards better, scarcer monies. And that's not how it works today at all, right? That's not what happened. So what's happened in the last 100 years? And I'm going to do a brief pause here because I had a decision to make this morning where, technically the title of this lunch and learn was the history of money. And we've pretty much covered most of the history of money up until this point. And when I practiced this presentation one time yesterday, from this point on, where I tried to take Monty's lessons and show them what it means and how it affects us today, I was not necessarily happy with how my practice presentation went. It's, monetary history, it's easy to go from A to B to C to D to this natural progression. And when I started doing the modern money stuff and the future of money, I felt like it was a little less cohesive, less easy to understand. So I actually went to bed yesterday thinking that I was going to stop the presentation at the end of the last slide with a little conclusion because I didn't think I had this part down. But I woke up this morning and I decided not to do that. Yeah, I decided to keep going because there's a lot of interesting stuff here. And it's going to help build the foundation as we hear more about what we're doing with ECO and as money's going to develop into the future. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. Please grant me the little bit of extra scrappiness and less polish that may come from this point forward. But we're going to talk about it, and it's going to help me too as an individual because I don't get to speak, very much, and so it helps build my presentation skills. So, as I said, around the year 1900, the entire world has sort of settled on this idea that we use gold as money and paper notes is used to kind of transfer that value to make it more easily portable and more easily transferable and to use the smaller denominations. But our money today isn't like that. It's not backed by anything in particular. Since 1971, when President Nixon left the gold standard, the dollar is no longer backed by any quantity of gold in the bank. And that's interesting because while the dollar has existed in name for 200 years or so, fundamentally the currency of today since 1971 is a completely different currency than existed before that. Prior to 1971, in essence, gold was the national currency of the United States. We were just using paper notes to kind of transfer that value. But now that's not the case anymore. So, how we fell off the gold standard is a complicated subject and it warrants lots of discussion. But in essence, we can understand that gold doesn't work that easily in a more global society, right? Even if we have these paper notes, gold is a rock. It is heavy, it is difficult to verify, it is difficult to transport, and a number of things like that. As the world became more global, as trade became more global, it's fair to say that gold didn't function well in that kind of environment. When we're talking about transferring value across space, physically transferring value, the way we have money today, fiat money, is an improvement on gold when it comes to transferring value across space. It is literally physically easier to transport than gold. So gold had difficulty with transferring value across space through the modern era and the globalization of money. And at the same time, and this part is harder to understand, and I still, I'm learning about it myself. But what really knocked the world off the gold standard was World War I and World War II, because during those two wars, governments across the world spent way more in paper notes than they actually had gold in the bank. And that's not a surprise. That actually happens all the time, right? You promise that your notes are going to be backed by gold, and then you create more paper notes than actually exist in the bank. So World War I and World War II were kind of these significant depeg moments, where fiat, where paper currencies across the world lost their natural pegging to gold, and governments had to kind of scramble to get back on it. And that's sort of how, the combination of those things is what led us to moving off of the gold standard. So our money today, has no value itself. It's not backed by anything physical. It's backed because we say it's money. And relevant today is this, how does a currency actually hold its value? How does it hold its peg? And in the crypto markets, we saw the stablecoin UST fall yesterday. It gets you thinking, like, how does the money hold its value? Those kind of things. But what our system allows for is actually a number of good things. It allows for complete control over the monetary supply. So we can control now. It's not just how much gold we can mine out of the ground. We can control how much money kind of enters the economy and enters the markets. And this is the system that is used worldwide. There are no currencies worldwide that operate on a gold or silver standard. But maybe now there's one that's operating on a half Bitcoin standard. But we'll see. So how is money today created? It's created through a combination of factors, through our independent Federal Reserve and our government in other ways too, through things like fiscal policy, where we can use interest rates, we can use these monetary policy tools, such as quantitative easing, buying back bonds on the market, and conducting these kind of market operations to control the money supply to a degree. Do we want the money supply to be expanding, or do we want it to be decreasing? It's a bit primitive, but it's how money works. And the idea is that it gives us kind of more control over how money works. And crucially, the system of money is inflationary, right? More money is being created every year. We have a Federal Reserve that targets a consumer price index increase of 2% per year, which means that they want prices to rise by 2% every year. Now, why would you want prices to rise? I guess the reason you want prices to rise is because it encourages investment in growth. If you know that your money is losing value by 2% every year, you're going to possibly invest your money to try and make it grow beyond that 2% that you're losing in the form of inflation. When you know your money's losing value, you're more incentivized to spend your money. So you go out and you invest it. You take out loans, you try and build businesses, and you try and do all sorts of things to improve the productivity of the world and the economy. You take out loans to start a business. As we know, entrepreneurs are the ones that drive the world forward by creating things that have never been created before. So fiat inflationary money does this. It does incentivize growth by incentivizing you to spend your money. At the same time, debt is reduced over time because the real value of your debt is going down because of the value of your debt in inflation. So if you buy a house in 1970 for $100,000 and you sell it for $1 million here in 2022, your $100,000 mortgage doesn't seem so bad, because that in real terms, $100,000 in 1970 isn't what $100,000 in 2022 buys you. So it incentivizes this kind of debt. And the idea is that it incentivizes spending. And it allows for government flexibility as well. So we saw, during the COVID pandemic, we were able to do a stimulus package during 2008. We can kind of create new money to try and get the economy going again when it's down. It allows, our system of money allows for this flexibility that wouldn't be possible if you were under a strict cap for how the money supply works. So our fiat money system allows for this level of flexibility. But there's downsides to this as well, right? Obviously, if a fiat currency is not well managed, it can lead to hyperinflation. And we should take a second here again to thank ourselves for having one of the most stable currencies that are out there in the world, or not take that for granted, right? Because there are more than 5 billion people around the world that have average inflation rates above 10%, I think. It's a huge number of people that don't have stable currencies that they can rely on, and we are one of the few that have a somewhat stable currency, even if there are those of us here that don't think it works as well as it could. So hyperinflation is a concern as well. But for us here in the United States, saving is penalized, right? Uh, we've all heard this idea that you have to make your money grow, right? That in order to save for retirement, you need to make your money grow. And what that really is the fact that if you save your money in the bank, you're going to fall behind. You need to be investing your money in order for it to grow. And that really comes from the fact that our money, the dollar itself, doesn't store value well over time. You can't just save your money in dollars. You need to invest in order to maintain your standard of living and have your money grow so that you can retire. Uh, and that's really interesting, right? Because saving is supposed to be something that is risk-free. You are just saving your money into the future. You're not doing anything. But we think of investing in our 401k as saving now. And investing is always supposed to be risky. Investing by its nature is supposed to be risky. So we've sort of financialized how we save our money to the point where instead of saving, we're now all forced to kind of put our money in these risky kind of assets, or things that are supposed to be risky, but now are too big to fail because everyone's retirement is in things like the stock market, and you can't just save your money in dollars. You're kind of forced into this thinking where investing is saving, but really, if you have a form of money that holds its value over time, saving the money itself is how you save your purchasing power. The money itself can hold its purchasing power, but that's not quite how it works today. And at the same time, it can lead to things like asset bubbles. So, we had this $2 trillion stimulus package in 2020 or whatever, and we've been creating a lot of new money in the world, as I'll show in a chart next. Over the last 50 years or so, a lot of new money, and that new money has to go somewhere, right? And what has happened is that people are investing all their money, because even if you don't understand all the dynamics of how money penalizes saving, you do understand this notion that we've been taught that you have to make your money grow. So everyone is investing all their extra cash. Not that many people are saving cash in the bank. They're investing it in things. And that's why you see, although numbers are down now, but you see things like everything that is investable has been hitting all-time highs in the last couple of years. And that's sort of to escape this inflationary feel where you feel like you're missing out if you're not investing. So things like the stock market, real estate, crypto. I have a friend that trades Yu-Gi-Oh cards, trading cards, and those are at all-time highs too. It's kind of this everything bubble where there's so much money that is sloshing around the world right now, and people know that they can't save it in the bank, so they're investing it into everything. And that's why these valuations of things like the stock market are far beyond their historical norms, and we're sort of seeing these asset bubbles kind of being created. And the crux of all of that is income inequality rising, right? Because if all of this new money is being created and a lot of it is pouring into investable assets, the people that benefit from that are those that have money to invest in assets, right? The people that don't benefit from that and fall further behind are those that are living paycheck to paycheck or can only save a little bit of money every month because their dollars are getting devalued every year from inflation, while everybody else's money is going up by investing it in assets. People who are investing are more able to easily escape the downsides of an inflationary monetary system than the people that are living paycheck to paycheck. And as one brief example of that, if we all got our $1,200 checks for the COVID stimulus two years ago, people that needed that money spent it on things like housing, food, clothing, bills, whatever. They got that $1,200 and then they spent it. Whereas I got my $1,200 and I invested it right away, and my money has been growing since. And that simple little dynamic kind of shows how the creation of new money, often leads to this increased inequality because people who don't need the money immediately invest it and they grow, and the people that need that money spend it, and it kind of goes. And so here I just want to show this chart a little bit, which is M2. It's one measure of a monetary supply. It's not perfect, but it's one measure of the monetary supply. And you can see that the money supply has grown by 100 times over the last 50 years or so. There are 100 times more dollars that are circulating than there used to be back then. And one quick point I want to say is that when you create new money, you're not actually creating any new value in an economy. And to illustrate that example, you know, look around your room right now, right? You have a room, there's all sorts of stuff in that room. And imagine that everything in your room totals up to a value of $100. There's $100 in your room economy. If you suddenly increase the amount of money in your room economy to $200, what changes about your room? Nothing, right? Because there's still one keyboard, a bunch of books, on the same amount of stuff. When you create more money, you don't actually create more stuff. You're just kind of changing how that stuff is valued relative to other things in that room and relative to the total amount of economy money in that economy. When you create new money, you make the value of each individual unit um, of currency go down. And it's interesting, right? Because I'm showing this chart here. It obviously goes up. And then on the next slide is the average cost of college tuition in the United States over the last 50 years or so. And you can see that it's steadily going up from 1971. And these two charts, they don't look that different, right? It's sharper on the money supply, but they don't look that different. So what's happening here, right? Because we know that certain industries today, like college tuition and healthcare, have seen their costs skyrocket in recent years, but we also know that most of the things that we buy have not seen their prices skyrocket, right? Most of the things are still relatively cheap. How come it's these areas of the economy that are the most important that everybody needs that have seen their prices rise? And the interesting answer to that is actually not why these costs have gone up by so much, but it's why other costs have stayed so low. And the answer to that, in my view, is mostly the advancement of technology, right? So over the last 50 years or so, technology has been expanding and growing at such an exponential rate. We can produce so much more stuff than we could before, and much faster and cheaper too. And that cheaper aspect is really what's at the crux of this. Almost everything in our world that we use today can be produced in more quantity and more cheaply than ever has been done before. And because of that, it sort of counters the increase. You know, you look at this money supply and you think that prices and everything should be rising, but because technology has advanced so rapidly, it's a countervailing force among this increase in the monetary supply. So you have this inflationary dynamic of the increased monetary supply, and increasing the money supply is always inflationary. It's a variable, but it doesn't always lead to price increases because there are other factors that lead into whether the prices you see on your shelves actually go up or not. And one of those is technology. So as the money supply has been expanding, technological growth has been so great in so many areas of what we need in so many industries that monetary supply growth going up, but technology is making costs go down. And that's why most of the stuff that we have is still relatively cheap. We haven't seen these giant increases. But not everything benefits from technological growth quite the same way. And college tuition is one of them. So if you are, you can't print more colleges in a factory. You can't just manufacture more colleges. It's an area that doesn't necessarily become more cheap as technology grows. And so what I posit, and the same is kind of true for healthcare, where there's constantly new expensive technologies being developed in healthcare where that are expensive by nature. And yes, maybe an MRI is cheaper than it was 15, 20 years ago, but the new technology, the new thing that we just developed is always going to be expensive and first. So what I posit here is that the price rises that we see in college tuition and in healthcare make sense based on how much the money supply has grown. The interesting thing is really that technology has been able to counter this chart with so much of the world, but it can't do it for anything. And that's why, it's why that this is going to be a harder problem to fix than I think a lot of people give it credit for. To me, this chart of growing college tuition makes sense based on this money supply chart, but technology's managed to counter that for a lot of other things. Then here, I want to quickly show this chart, which I think is really interesting and is a bit of a mind bender for me, even though I've seen it for 2 years. This is the price of college tuition when priced in gold, right? And if you price Yale's college tuition in gold, you can see that college tuition is actually cheaper in 2020 than it was in 1970, or on average over the last 50 years. College tuition, when priced in gold, is cheaper. Compare that to this. Instead of straight up college tuition and priced in gold is cheaper. If you saved a certain amount of gold, you know, 1,500 grams in 1950, and you just kept that in a vault, you could use that gold to pay for college today without having to do anything else. And so what am I trying to say here? And I just want to do this one slide on gold, because gold is the ancient metal of kings. I really, even though I'm not that bullish on its future, gold deserves our respect. It is, the ancient metal of kings for a reason. It cannot just be devalued at will. You can only have a gold supply based on what is mined out of the ground, and it has a low supply inflation of less than 2% per year. And where that's interesting is that we value the CPI, or we measure inflation by the price impact, the consumer price index, and we target 2% price growth per year. But gold here, we're talking about the supply growth. And you can see in this chart that the money supply growth has been growing by way more than 2% per year, even though prices haven't necessarily skyrocketed quite the same way. Gold has this low supply inflation, and it really works as sort of a store of value. And it's where you come back to this multi-currency mindset, right? Because a lot of people compare gold to things like the stock market, and they say that gold as an investment has underperformed the stock market over the last whatever. And that's true, but I don't quite like that comparison, because gold is not a company that you are investing in with cash flows and things like this. Gold is a base money. Its comparison is the dollar itself, in my view. Gold is a base layer money like the dollar, which, although it is worse at storing value through space, it is better at storing value through time than the dollar. So put differently, gold is simply a better store of value than the dollar is right now, or always has been. And so that's where you kind of get this different money for different purposes kind of thing. That is this mindset that I really try to preach a lot, adopting a multi-currency mindset where you don't have to do everything in one currency. You can have different money for spending and different money for saving. And then, oh, yes, I forgot. I added this slide this morning. Two quotes from the book, The Fiat Standard, by the economist Saifedean Ammous, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard as well, that I really kind of like. And the first one says, "The fiat standard was born out of the need for governments to manage their de facto default on their gold obligations. It was not designed to optimize the user experience of currency, transactions, and banking." And then the second quote, "The fiat standard was not the design of an engineer. It was instead the central bank's desperate solution to their looming insolvency, the inevitable geopolitical outcome of a 60-year-long marriage of money and politics, of politics and money. The history of fiat is the history of government-run financial institutions managing defaults. It's not a technology consciously provided to provide sound money or payment transfers." And that has really stuck with me since I read it over the last couple of weeks, where we've seen over thousands of years this natural progression towards gold with paper as the money. And then over the last 100 years or so, we saw a lot of things break that. And it's really kind of important to think, because no one, we're here at ECO, maybe we do, but a lot of people out there don't question how money works at all. And these quotes kind of crystallized for me that the way our system of money works was not a carefully constructed system designed to maximize the people using the dollars. It was kind of a desperate bailout of defaults after wars and unable to keep the peg. It's not a system by design. What if someone designed a better money? Who does our money work for here, right? It doesn't work for the end user. It works for these other kind of purposes. So this is the last section. I'm going to try and speak fast. I just want to go over Bitcoin a little bit. And, this might be one step earlier than you'd want me to end, continuing into crypto, but we're going to stop at the end of Bitcoin here, just to kind of complete this circle of monetary progression. For a lot of people, Bitcoin is still just some weird internet currency. How does it work and why does it matter? Digital payments today, if you think about how digital payments today work, all payments go through intermediaries. If I use my debit or credit card to buy something at a vendor, my bank, MasterCard or Visa, the payment processor, MasterCard or Visa for the merchant, and their bank all have that transaction routed through them. It is a mess of intermediaries to make any sort of payments today digitally. It is nothing like if I hand a dollar bill to you. If I hand you a dollar bill, I have the money, I give you the money. If you have a digital payment today, it's nothing like that. And technology has kind of abstracted that away on the outside. But what's happening behind the scenes is this huge mess of multiple intermediaries, all trying to sort things out with one another, often 5+. And if you add Venmo or PayPal or Apple Pay, Cash App to that mix or Zelle, you're adding even more layers on top of this thing of intermediaries. Digital payments today are nothing like handing a dollar bill to someone else. And if you need to hear more about that, I'm sure Haley would be happy to tell you about the mess that is payment operations as a whole thing. It's crazy. So Bitcoin was kind of created to make digital payments more like handing a dollar bill to someone than the mess of intermediaries that we have today. And the history of Bitcoin is that it was created by the anonymous person or group of people, Satoshi Nakamoto, in 2000 and I have a typo there. White paper released October 31st, 2018. It was 2008, where on this cypherpunks mailing list, which was kind of a bunch of computer nerds and crypto anarchists, before, when crypto just meant cryptography, not cryptocurrency, Satoshi was on this board and he kind of released the specs for this new peer-to-peer digital cash called Bitcoin. And again, the idea is to make digital payments more like handing a dollar bill to someone than the kind of intermediary laden mess that we have today, creating digital cash. What makes this unique, what makes Bitcoin unique, is that there's no kind of central point of failure. You might say, how can someone create a new currency? Although, we're doing it. If you have a company or a group of people, trying to create a new currency, you kind of create this central point of failure, where if that thing fails, then the entire currency fails as a result. What makes Bitcoin unique is through the blockchain, through its unique blockchain system. There is no central point of failure, where there's no, the system lives on through this network of nodes that exist decentralized across the globe. There is no person, no group of people, no state or no government that can shut down how the Bitcoin network works. It is peer-to-peer and decentralized. And if you're not familiar really with what a blockchain is, I like to think of a blockchain in the most simple form, like Bitcoin, as an empty notebook, right? And let me come back to this example on the next slide. So there's two important characteristics of Bitcoin that really kind of make it interesting. You have this idea of sound money, and then you have censorship resistance. So Bitcoin operates on a fixed monetary policy, where instead of having your group of people like the Federal Reserve or the government deciding how much money gets created in the supply, you have a fixed monetary policy. Every 10 minutes on average, new Bitcoin is created through the process of mining. So every 10 minutes on average, new Bitcoin is created. And every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that is created every 10 minutes cuts in half. So new Bitcoin created every 10 minutes, every 4 years, that amount every 10 minutes cuts in half. And this is going to continue until the year 2140, at which point there's not going to be any more Bitcoin ever created. It's going to have this hard money cap of 21 million. It has this fixed monetary policy and is scarce. So, what's really interesting here, because Bitcoin is infinitely divisible, or right now 10 digits, 8 digits, 10 digits, it's very divisible. Now you have a form of money that is more scarce than anything that we have seen before, while also being infinitely divisible and easily portable. It's kind of like you're combining gold and email here. You kind of have this unforgeable scarcity, the scarcest form of money that we've ever had, that is also portable and easier to transport through space than things like the fiat currency, than the US dollar. If you try to send $15,000 to India, it's not going to be that easy right now. But if you try to do it with Bitcoin, they can be with them in 10 minutes. So you sort of combine the best of you combine the prospect of easy to transfer money with this level of unforgeable scarcity. And the process that Bitcoin gets mined is, on a blockchain. So you have this empty notebook. A blockchain is an empty notebook, and every 10 minutes, someone is writing on the pages all of the transactions that are happening in that 10 minutes. All the transactions on the Bitcoin network are happening. And then every 10 minutes, when a new block is mined, essentially the page of the notebook is full and you turn the page on to the next one. So a blockchain, when you say it's like a ledger, you can really just think of it as this notebook where a new page is being turned every 10 minutes that has the history of all the transactions that have ever happened to it. So with Bitcoin, you have this level of programmatic security, scarcity, and portability. And where I'll interject here with regards to what we're doing at Eco, even though I only know as much as you guys, I have become really positive on this idea of a fixed monetary policy over the last couple of years, where I see in our fiat system, our current system, we spend so much of our political time fighting over who gets to control the money, who gets to create the money so it can be used for other political goals. And we lose sight of the fact about the money itself, keeping the money secure and working for its users itself. Money has become a tool in our political system to reach some other political end goal, and it's not just working in money. So, we spend all our time fighting about who gets to control the money and not actually on how do we actually solve problems. Uh, so I've really become fond of Bitcoin's fixed monetary policy, taking the human error kind of out of money. But what we're doing with where that has become into question with eco, and that I look forward to hearing more on, is that our eco currency, it sounds like, is going to have something like an independent group that is kind of covering the monetary policy. And where that's interesting is that when you have a separate currency, like eco, where you can have the flexibility of control in good times and bad to kind of get some of the positives of the system that we see today. But that system of money is not tied to this greater, larger political system that we have today. You kind of are able to separate, it looks like to me, and again, I'll be happy to hear more, where yes, you have people being able to make the most out of the currency side of things, but you're not going to have people trying to use that to accomplish other kind of political goals, because the people that are focusing on the eco currency are just focused on the currency itself. It's not really a secret plan to control the currency to do healthcare and other kind of things like that. So that's something I just wanted to say, because it's where my own assumptions have been challenged in the last month or so. Finally, and I know it's 9:59. I'm gonna keep speaking fast. I'm gonna try to be done in the next 5 minutes or so. It's okay if you have to go, of course. Censorship resistance is the idea that everybody using the network is equal, right? We see a lot of financial censorship in our world, where an example I like to see is that, or I like to say, is that in 2018 or so, when there was the Free Hong Kong protests, people in China who were using their WeChat apps to pay for subway fare were later tracked and arrested. Financial censorship is really dangerous. And we even see that in the United States too, where people in industries, and perfectly legal industries like gambling, cannabis, or things like sex work, are denied the right to even use the banking system itself. We pick and choose who's allowed to use our money. And that's incredibly dangerous, because if you can't use things in banks, you can't secure your money, you're kind of subject to a higher risk of crime. And since this banking operation to kind of cut off people from, these people from the banking system, they say that they're worried about money laundering, right? So they require banks to get more information about what people do for work. And this really started more in 2012 or 2013 or so, with an operation called Operation Choke Point. And at that point, you started to see these people in these unfavorable industries like sex work, like gambling, get cut off from the banking system. And since that time, the homicide rate of sex workers has gone up by 400% since this thing was passed, and we started to see people getting excluded from the banking system more. It's incredibly dangerous to get cut off from the banking system, and it's not really fair. Again, it kind of leans into this idea of money being used as a political tool, as opposed to something that's just supposed to store value and transfer it through space and time. And what we see is that when money is being used for these political purposes, it harms the ability of money to do that its kind of functions, to do those storing value, transferring it through space and time itself. It loses that ability. So censorship resistance is the idea that anybody on the Bitcoin network is equal, where I can use the network, the lowest person in the world can use the network, and the president of the United States can use the network, and no one can tell us that we can't use the network if we have Bitcoin, where the lowest person in the world is treated the same on the Bitcoin network as the person with the most on the network. So okay, final stop here. Where do we want to go from here? Okay, to me, Bitcoin represents a much clearer progression from the 12,000 year history of money that came before it than the paper money system that we see today, where we spent this 12,000 years naturally progressing towards the forms of money that were both as scarce and as portable as possible. And then we've had this weird 100 years, and now we have this engineered thing, this Bitcoin. Again, that quote, our current system was not engineered to be a good money. Bitcoin, and what we've been seeing since, is created and engineered specifically to benefit the users of that money. And so to me, it's a much more natural progression of the 12,000 years that came before it than the current system that we have today. And I really do like to harp on this multi-currency mindset thing, because people, because we think that we can we can use the dollar for everything. We think that we can use the dollar for everything, but for most of the world, that's not the case, right? So if you have someone in Nicaragua or Asia or South America, they're used to this multi-currency mindset already. What they do is they spend in their local currency and then they try to acquire US dollars for saving because they know that US dollars inflate less than the local currency. So people all over the world already have this multi-currency mindset where they use local currency for spending and they try and acquire US dollars for saving. And we have an aversion to that because we think that we can use the dollar for everything, even though on the back end, we can't use the dollar for everything because we're not saving our money in dollars. We're saving our money in stocks and real estate and things like this. So when people say that you can't spend Bitcoin in stores, it doesn't really matter to me. It's not something right now that you can use to buy goods in stores. You can have different money for different purposes. You can spend money in US dollars because it's a payment that's acceptable for payments, but you can save money in a form of money that has better value storing properties than the dollar. And yes, the price of Bitcoin is volatile. There's no doubt about it. To me, what makes something a store of value is how it works, and how it works is why Bitcoin sort of excels in the store of value kind of properties. So I'm okay. I have that multi-currency mindset where you have money for spending, money for saving, the same way someone in South America might be spending Nicaraguan Cordova and trying to save in dollars. So the way that we today, treat our stocks account essentially as money for saving that we can't spend in stores. You can think of Bitcoin kind of in the same way. So I think that multi-currency mindset, especially as this crypto world is starting to evolve here, and you're going to start seeing more and more of these things used and accepted, is a good mental model to start trying to think about some of this stuff. And then, again, this idea of that our people like to harp on, who does our money work for? The way that our money works today, it does not work for the person that just wants to save their money in the bank. I look at people that I know that have no interest in investing. They don't want to invest. They don't have the time. They're just not interested in money. They want to do other things, and they're saving their money in the bank, and they don't. And I feel for those people because you're not able to just save your money in the bank if you want to retire and have enough for saving, because your money is going to be losing value every year. So you're kind of forced to be an investor even if you don't want to be. And that's one example of how our money doesn't work for us today. So moving forward, as a team, as a company, again, since Bitcoin, there are more experiments in money happening, right? Bitcoin sort of completes this foundation where now if we tried to go further, it would just be more confusing. And I twist myself up in knots about thinking about what's happening now all the time as well. And it's very possible that in the months and weeks and years to come, we learn things that challenge some of what I have put here in this presentation today. It's possible, it's likely, it'll happen. And that's okay, right? I'm excited to have my assumptions challenged about money as well. I look forward to that, and it's going to be exciting to be a part of this. And, I hope that this presentation does sort of help provide a good foundation for where we're